Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to a video that we're doing from the R2F channel. For those of you that are new to the R2F or Return to Fitcha channel, we are a channel that is dedicated to producing content to help combat spiritual abuse, cult activity in the Ummah. So I'm going to jump right into it. Assalamu alaikum, everybody, again. Dr. Yasir Qadhi, he spoke recently about spiritual abuse. There's a video. I'm going to put the link to it in the description of the video, so you'll be able to access that. But most of you have already probably seen it. This was basically an indirect response to the Wisam Sharieff incident. You know, where Wisam Sharieff, a famous reciter, or famous person in Ummah that has done work with, spreading the Quran and helping people learn how to recite the Quran. He has been charged by the FBI, and a report is out there with his sexual misconduct and actually sexual misconduct dealing with a minor. It's all over the internet, and you can go easily find the FBI report. Just go to Google and type it in. But I will warn you, there's some graphic details in there that might upset you. So if you're not ready to handle that, then don't access it. Just know that there's some very credible evidence that the FBI has found that he was involved in some serious sexual misconduct with a minor, and just even if it wasn't a minor, it's very bad misconduct as far as being a Muslim, one, and being a recognized famous Muslim leader in the Ummah. But you can access that to see the details. Again, warning, it's some bad stuff in there. So in Dr. Yasir Qadhi's khutbah, he makes some very good points that, should be taken to account, which people should listen to and follow. And they're good reminders for all of us as Muslims. However, I do have to address some major areas where, he really missed the mark, and he actually contributed to the major problems in our Ummah that fosters abuse and misconduct. So, and I'm pretty sure he's not going to see this video because, like, who am I? Who are we? But if someone or anybody else can benefit from this, and if you're a leader, especially in a Muslim Ummah, you need to hear these things. So, because this video is for anyone that may be in a leadership position and may be in a similar situation as Yasir Qadhi, where you might have to respond to incidents of abuse or other scandals in the community. But before I get to the issues with Yasir Qadhi's response, I want to give a very simple framework for Muslim leaders like Yasir Qadhi to follow when dealing with these types of things. Of course, this is very simple. This is not in depth. This is just something to start you off, to get you thinking in the right direction so that you don't make some big mistakes like Yasir Qadhi did. Although you will hear me addressing Yasir Qadhi, these recommendations are for any leader in the Ummah. But before that, I know most of you are asking, like, who do you think you are? Who is this random person that he think he can advise Dr. Yasir Qadhi? And that is a fair question. First, I'm not doing this for clicks or trying to use Yasir Qadhi to boost our channel or boost our content. We've been doing this for years. We have a very small following, but alhamdulillah, we have helped a lot of people. And we do it simply for Allah's sake. And this is why we're doing this. Okay. And it just happens to be Yasir Qadhi that we're addressing. I actually have benefited a lot from Dr. Qadhi's content, particularly his Sirah series, his series on the Sahaba, anything dealing with history. His stuff those types of things are very good. But if you watch this video by Dr. Yasir Qadhi, like he said himself, basically, we could benefit from someone Islamically. It doesn't mean that they're infallible. They're going to make mistakes. We're all going to make mistakes. I'm going to make mistakes. But as far as like my qualifications, particularly in this subject matter, first, I'm a government auditor, where we make sure that government officials aren't engaging in fraud, misconduct, or abuse, or abusing their authority. So essentially, I work in the field of keeping leaders in check and auditing them and looking into what they're doing and providing them guidance and instruction of how to protect their organizations or their institution from leaders or other people in their organization committing fraud, abuse, or misconduct. Okay, so I actually work in this field. I'm also in the final stages of my dissertation, alhamdulillah, and inshallah, I will soon receive my doctorate in educational leadership. And, you know, as if anybody knows, as when you're getting a doctorate, you have to do a dissertation. And this is like where your expertise is going to be. So my expertise is going to be educational leadership. But then I got a singular expertise, which is my dissertation, what I did a lot of research on it, and have been spending the last few years working on and researching the topic. And what does that topic actually have to be? Or what is it? It's educator sexual misconduct, particularly in the Islamic institutions. Finally, I have experienced spiritual abuse directly and worked with dozens of other people who have as well. That is what our channel is about. Our channel, Return to Fitra, is dedicated to addressing spiritual abuse in the Ummah. We're small, we're grassroots, but we know what we are talking about because we have firsthand experience, and we work on this topic and with people who undergo these same types of things on a day-to-day basis. So it just so happens that I'll say we, know a lot about this specific topic. So here are some points for leaders that you should, take away from this, what I'm saying, before I actually get into Yasir Qadhi's video. If he knew this before he did the video, he would have maybe approached it a different way. So the first thing is, and this is the most important thing because this will lead you down the right path, is you have to educate yourself. Okay? The first thing you have to do is educate yourself. That's the first thing. Dr. Yasir Qadhi, with all due respect, he's a very educated man, educated Islamically and secularly, right? He's doctor before his name. I mean, he's educated. So he should know the importance of conducting proper research or getting information on a topic that you actually are not the expert on before you start speaking on it. If we're talking Islamically, right, the Qari doesn't go out and start giving like fiqh lectures unless they do some research, right? And vice versa. The faqih who knows about, all the things with jurisprudence, how to make a wudu and all that, he doesn't go and start, giving tafsir class or hifz class or tajweed class if he doesn't know about those things. So you have to do your research first. That's all I'm saying. You have to do your research. Look into the topic first. So you have to know the dangers of engaging in activities when you have not been trained in. For instance, in the video, Yasir Qadhi talks about the dangers of people of engaging in stuff that they actually don't know about, right? So if we look into it, and I'm not going to play the video, but we'll play different parts of the video, but he talks about Epic Masjid at the end where he says, one of the things we do, we don't engage in counseling because counseling is one of these dangerous areas, which he's right, where people actually, leaders get caught up and make mistakes, big mistakes, and they engage in misconduct and abuse and take advantage of people that they're counseling because they actually aren't counselors or they have no proper training in counseling. Okay? So you don't engage in something if you're not actually trained in that area. And Dr. Yasir Qadhi, from what you were speaking, I'm pretty sure you're actually not trained in dealing with or responding to incidents of sexual misconduct. So you don't get up in front of a community and start speaking about spiritual abuse. It's a buzzword, it's a big thing, but it's actually a big thing in our community, right? And it covers a lot of things. This is not the video to go into it, but there's a lot of different issues with sexual misconduct, spiritual abuse. If you don't know about these things, or if you haven't done your research or haven't educated yourself, you don't go up in front of a community and start speaking about the topic, right? If you do, there's a high risk of you causing more harm than good. Okay. And I'm not going to, put a verdict on this video of Yasir Qadhi. It's just that I watched it and I felt that there's some things that need to be addressed. And, that's the first point. Educate yourself. 2, the second point, and this is very important, you have to prioritize your victims. You have to prioritize victims. Whenever you're doing, you have to think victims first. Okay? Whenever you look at situations like this, you will find that there's 2 primary stakeholders. Okay? 2 primary stakeholders. Who are the stakeholders? A stakeholder is someone that they're affected by the situation. And there's 2 main stakeholders whenever you're talking about abuse, misconduct, sexual misconduct, or spiritual abuse. Of course, and these two stakeholders are victims and the institution. Victims and the institution. And I know you're thinking like, well, hey, there's more people affected by that. Well, yes, there are more stakeholders. There's family members, there's community members, there's other leaders, and even the accused offender is a stakeholder, right? They all have something to gain or lose in this situation. But when you boil these things down, there's primary stakeholders and secondary stakeholders. The ones I just listed, family members, community members, other students, other congregants, they're secondary stakeholders. The primary stakeholders are the victims and the institution, right? So when you're talking about like community members, right, they can either fall under the institution side or the victim side. We're talking about family members, like maybe family members of the victim. They're actually like secondary victims, but they fall under the actual victims, okay? And I'm gonna talk about when I'm using the term victim, I'm gonna explain what that is. So one of the biggest problems that you'll find with these leaders, right, and it's not just Dr. Yasir Qadhi, it's the majority, like 99% of the leaders in Muslim institutions. And when I talk about institutions in this video, right, also, I'm really talking about the leaders of these institutions, the leaders of our ummah, the people that we look up to for guidance, the imams, the shuyukh, the YouTube personalities, the teachers, all these people that are in the ummah that have some power or authority, or we look up to, or we look for guidance and we look for examples. These are the institution. They represent the institution, okay? Because an institution is an inanimate thing. It's an inanimate entity. It can't do anything, right? What the institution actually is are the leaders, right? An institution cannot abuse somebody, right? The masjid is not going to engage in sexual misconduct. It's a building. It's a building that leaders run. So when I say institution or I say leaders, they're synonymous. We're talking about the same thing, okay? Or I'm talking about the same thing. Okay, don't let someone say, oh, the institution is doing this. Well, no, the leaders of that institution are doing it, okay? So the leaders are the representatives of the institution. So the mistake that these leaders do, or the institution does, is they prioritize the institution. In other words, they prioritize themselves. We want to protect ourselves. We want to protect the masjid. We want to protect the leaders. And the victims become secondhand. They become, maybe, if they're lucky, the second priority. But that's the wrong way to handle it, okay? When you're in this American Muslim community, when leaders protect the institution, like I said, they're actually protecting themselves. Some of this might seem counterintuitive, but you have to, when you really think about it, it's not, okay? Really, when the institution or the leaders want to protect themselves or protect the institution, the best way to do that is to focus on protecting the victims, prioritizing the victims, prioritizing the victims. That's how you protect the institution. That's the best way. Now, again, I'm going to explain what I mean by victims. Of course, you have the actual victims of the misconduct, spiritual abuse. You have the actual people that were involved. But when I'm talking about victims, right, I'm referring to victims of other cases of misconduct or abuse. And we can't forget the potential future victims of misconduct or abuse, which really includes everybody that is listening. Everybody that is listening, because anyone can be a victim of leadership misconduct and abuse. Children, adults, males, females, nobody is immune, right? And if you're watching this after you've watched Dr. Yasir Qadhi's video, or you watch it afterwards, you'll see some of the mistakes based off of what I just said in this second point that he made in that video. Abuse isn't limited to children. Abuse isn't limited to females, even though they're the primary, recipients of abuse and spiritual abuse. Okay, you can't say, oh, since that person's an adult, they're a consenting adult, right? There's nothing going on here. They consented to was that whatever's going on. No, it's still abuse. It's still misconduct. It's still spiritual abuse. Okay, we can't just say, oh, it's because they're adults. We're not going to look at it. We're going to sweep it under the rug, which happens all the time. And Allah knows best, but a Dr. Yasir Qadhi, he just glazed over and I'll talk about this later in the video, he just glazed over one of the big issues of how a lot of women are abused in the ummah when we talk about secret marriages. And so I talk about 2 points. First point is educate yourself, right? Second point is prioritize the victims. Prioritize victim. Now, the third point is, and it's a small point, but it's a big one, correct your mistakes because it's inevitable, right? You're going to make mistakes. Everybody's going to make mistakes. I'm going to make mistakes in this video, right? I might say something that might be insensitive to the victims or might re-traumatize somebody. And if someone brings that to my attention, it's very important that I correct it. I go out and make another video, right? And say, hey, I misspoke. This is what I meant by XYZ. And this is what Dr. Yasir Qadhi could do, because in his video, he could potentially have re-traumatized victims and the way that he approached his video. Because people that aren't in this world, that don't know about these things, they would view Yasir Qadhi, like if you look at the comments, like, oh, mashallah, it's so great, because they probably have no idea about how spiritual abuse actually works. But people that are engaged in this field, people that have experienced this field, whether it's being a victim or whether it's they've worked in the field or whether they've tried to help people that are victims, they probably, like, so many red flags went off when he was talking. And I'm just going to cover some of the major ones that came up for me. And again, it's not just to hear, like, I'm not trying to bash Yasir Qadhi or say, oh, he's the worst, or use this, like, I'm going to refute. Like, I'm not into that refutation culture. We don't do that, okay? But we're trying to help the ummah and help us get better as a ummah, especially if you're a leader in the ummah. We have to get better. So, third one, correct your mistakes, okay? If you misspeak or you handle something wrong, fix them publicly. You have to show everyone that you are sincerely trying to help and make things better, and not just protect yourself, not just look good or capitalize on the situation. Like, I'm pretty sure everybody's going to be making videos about Wisam Sharieff. I'm going to talk about this. I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to use that to promote this. That is the wrong approach. If you're using Wisam Sharieff situation to use it as a way to defend your institution, like, okay, well, we used to use him, or he spoke with us, and we got to speak out just to separate ourselves from that. Or I'm going to use this because Wisam Sharieff he's part of this Maghribi, and I don't like them, and I'm going to use this as an example. If you use this for some alternative agenda, and it's not focused on helping victims, which is, supporting the actual victims in the situation, bringing it to light so that other potential victims that are still quiet get the courage to speak up, right? Or educate the ummah so that they don't fall victim to the same thing, then you're not doing it for the right reasons. Okay, so that's it. I give 3 points. Very simple, 3 points. You see them on the screen, on the side screen there. 3 points that it will get you in the right direction if you're a Muslim leader to start dealing with these situations. 1, educate yourself. 2, prioritize the victims. And 3, correct your mistakes. Okay, so, like, even if Dr. Yasir Qadhi and other Muslims at least remember these 3 points, they will be able to help our ummah escape this toxic culture that allows abuse and misconduct to happen with virtually no accountability. Like, I don't want to go on too far a tangent, but I would bet push-ups or whatever you want to, we don't gamble as Muslims, but we could bet push-ups or wager some push-ups or something, right? That this situation with Wisam Sharieff was reported to somebody in the ummah, a leader in the ummah. I'm so sure of it. I'm so sure that the first stop wasn't to the FBI. I'm pretty sure somebody, whether it was his wife or somebody else, said, hey, something's going on with this brother and you need to do it. Whether they went to another imam, another scholar, another teacher, another leader, somebody in ummah, and somehow it didn't get dealt with. It got swept under the rug. Sister, don't expose him. He's a good brother. It's private sins, blah, whatever it is. I'm pretty sure. And it probably got to the point where, like, nothing was being done. I have no resort except to go to the FBI, which I'm not criticizing the sister at all for going to the FBI. When you're in a situation where you don't have power, you have to do what you have to do to stop the wrong in halal means, and reporting to the authorities of a crime that is being committed, especially against a minor, and all. You did the right thing. You did the right thing. And I would love, when the sister is ready, and I'm pretty sure it's a very sensitive issue. I'm referring to Wisam Sharieff and anybody else that was wrong too. to come on our show or talk to us about this so we could learn more about it or the situation, because there's a lot of people that are in her same exact situation that they know of a wrongness going on, whether it's a family member, whether it's a leader, or they're actually victims themselves and they don't know what to do. You have to report. And we have to support people who are reporting this, because as much as we know about sexual abuse, sexual misconduct, spiritual abuse, for every one case that we know about, there's 90 more, because people just don't report these things, especially in the Muslim Ummah. But I don't want to get too far off on a tangent. So again, 3 points. 1, educate yourself. 2, prioritize the victims. And 3, correct your mistakes. Okay? When you listen or re-listen to the khutbah done by Yasir Qadhi, ask yourself, did he prioritize the victims or did he prioritize the institution? That's the main question, right? It's a 40-minute talk. And we want to know is, did he prioritize the victims? And that's how you say, like, pass, fail, right? Pass, fail. If he prioritized the victims, he passed. If he prioritized the institution, prioritized protecting the leaders, prioritized normalizing and protecting the status quo, then he failed. So the first part of his talk was very good because it provided much needed education and prioritized victims. It can be summarized to this one section, and I'll play the video right there. Nobody is infallible except the prophets. And we're not dealing with any more prophets until Isa alayhi salam comes back. Okay? So we can safely say nobody that we know or come encounter with is going to be infallible. And that's a very important point to educate, victims and potential future victims, right? Nobody's infallible. These leaders have flaws and they make mistakes every single day. They make mistakes. We make mistakes every single day. They're just like you and me. They just have more knowledge and they may be more pious, or we may be pious. Like I said, Allah knows best, but we take the knowledge from them and we take their leadership as far as how they run the masjid affairs and all these different things. This is what they're doing, but that doesn't make them infallible. Do not, because you think this person is holy. Okay? We don't want to do that. You got to always protect yourself and protect yourself from danger. Okay? So this is just in the first 3 minutes, and then he actually pivots at that point. So we can say the first 3 or 4 minutes, he prioritized victims. And then he talks about the dangers of seeking knowledge for the wrong reasons and having improper intentions, which is actually an important thing. However, it's about 3 minutes, and it could be best summarized, and I'll play the clip, okay, just so you can hear it yourself. So very good. I mean, it's good information, and it's definitely something that needs to be talked about and is talked about a lot with people that are students of knowledge, people that are seeking Islamic knowledge. It's talked about a lot, but it's a great reminder, right? However, and you guys are saying, well, what's wrong with that? Think about who this is actually addressing. This is addressing the future leaders of the Ummah. And right now, remember, leaders, institution. It's addressing the future institution. Although this information is good and needs to be talked about to the future leaders of the Ummah, right now, we need to focus on the victims and the potential victims. Okay? So this is basically a way that, say, hey, we're going to give this advice, but it's a way to actually protect the institution. So the section, these 3 or 4 minutes, actually addresses the institution. Okay, remember, leaders and institution are synonymous. Okay, so then he spends about 2 minutes on spiritual abuse. And I'm going to play the video because he gives a good definition of spiritual abuse. What this is also a good topic. It's good that he's talking about this. So talks about spiritual abuse, and I don't want to criticize his definition too much, right? But if we can make further videos explaining and going into detail what actual spiritual abuse is, but it's real simple. It's using Islam to manipulate, control, and abuse somebody, right? You're manipulating and using Islam, and sometimes you might not even manipulate Islam, but it's some kind of manipulation where you're using it as a tactic to abuse somebody or conduct misconduct. Okay, think about this when we talk about later when we get into secret marriages. And I know the video is kind of long, but it's worth listening. I think if you're actually a Muslim leader, you need to listen to this video. If you're someone who has connection with Dr. Yasir Qadhi, ask him to listen to the video, and and he can correct his ways as well going forward. Because we all want to get better. That's the whole goal. It's not here to bring shame on everybody. It's here to get better as a Muslim ummah, and especially with the Muslims leaders leading the ummah in this direction. Right. So spiritual abuse is manipulating or using Islam to control, abuse, right, and take advantage of somebody. Okay. So he gives a good definition. But then this could be considered prioritizing the victims because he's educating people. He's educating the potential victims that are listening of what spiritual abuse is and why to stay away from it so you can protect yourself. But then he pivots right back to prioritizing the institution. And I was particularly annoyed because he did it at a time when the listener is actually very vulnerable, right? When you're doing public speaking, and Dr. Yasir Qadhi is a great public speaker, and he knows what he's doing. I'm not saying like he planned this but he should have been aware from it. But the reason why he wasn't aware of it because he wasn't prioritizing the victims in his speech, as we'll cover in this video. He did it at a time when the listener is vulnerable because it was right when he was talking about abusing minors, right? When you're bringing up something about abusing minors, right, the listener is like vulnerable at that point or like very sensitive because it's an emotional issue. You're thinking about kids getting abused, being sexually abused, and like you're in an emotional state, right? And when you're in that emotional state, and I'm not saying Yasir Qadhi, like we've dealt with cults and cult leaders and how they use these types of things and these perfectly timed pivots or inclusions when the listener is in an emotional state to basically manipulate them, right? And I'm pretty sure Dr. Yasir Qadhi was not doing this on purpose, but you have to be aware of these things. And when you see them do this, like my red flag went boop when this comes up, and I'll just let you listen to it. So let me pull it up. Did you catch that? Did you catch that? I hope you caught that. Because he says the big if. He says, if this has been substantiated, if this is something that actually happened, right there, you're now like, why are you talking about if? Why are you talking about if? Why are we casting doubt on the situation now? That's a problem. Because like when someone comes to, because remember, we're talking to victims. Remember when you're hearing him speak, imagine he's talking to someone who's actually been abused with spiritual abuse, whether it's sexual or just plain old spirit, because not all spiritual abuse relates to like just sex. Okay. Like for instance, me and a lot of the people that we work with in Return to Fitra, we were spiritually abused for decades. None of it had to do, some people, it involved sexual misconduct. But like for me, I never experienced any sexual misconduct. It was financial abuse. It was spiritual manipulation. All these different things we get to that spiritual abuse can be used to get. It just doesn't always boil down to sex. But anyway, he says, imagine a victim standing there and you're like, yeah, if it's true what you're saying, if this has been, yes, there's a time when we talk about substantiating and verifying all this. This is very subtle, but when he talks about if this been substantiated, right, he's pivoting, right? He's pivoting. It's not prioritizing the victims, it's prioritizing the institution, right? So not only, guess what? Not only does it prioritize the institution, when you're talking about if this has been substantiated, if this is actually true, if this actually happened, when you're using words like that and you're a Muslim leader, guess who you're actually prioritizing? You got it. He's prioritizing the offender in this because you're giving the offender the benefit of the doubt, right? And remember, we're talking about the situation with Wisam Sharieff, that the FBI have actual recordings, the video recordings of him committing let's just say, you have testimony and video recordings of him committing the following: spiritual abuse, sexual misconduct, and sexual misconduct or sexual abuse of a minor. That's three different things when we're talking about Islamically. Now, spiritual abuse in general is not illegal. He's not going to be charged for that. Sexual misconduct, the stuff that he was doing on camera with another adult or whatever, most likely, based on what the report is saying, he's not going to be charged for that. It's not a crime. He's going to be charged for the third one because it involved a minor. But we're Muslim and we're Muslim leaders. If he was being charged by Muslim leadership or the Ummah to say, okay, hey, what's going on here? Those are 3 separate charges that he's facing because he committed spiritual abuse by using Islam to manipulate, allegedly, because it was based off of one of the other abusers' testimony. We don't know if it's true, but let's assume it's true. Let's assume that he said, you got to do this XYZ, this perverted act to get closer to Allah. That's spiritual abuse, right? Go back to the definition Yasir Qadhi gave. He's manipulating Islam to achieve the benefit that he wants. That's spiritual abuse. Doing sexual acts on video and sharing with somebody that, you're not married with and all that. Sexual misconduct. Islamically, that's sexual misconduct. And then you have the child abuse part. Okay? So, like I said, substantiating claims and verifying claims is an important issue. However, there's a time and place to talk about these things. This is not the time and place to talk about it. Okay? It's after a very public scandal. And so this is not the right time and place. So here he's prioritizing not only the institution, but the offender. And also, just to be clear, again, I'm going to repeat this. I don't think he's doing this on purpose. It's because we as Muslim leaders in the Ummah do not know about this, right? We're ill-informed. We're not educated on this topic, and we need to be better informed. We need to educate ourselves, okay? But again, Allah knows best. The problem really is that he, like I said, he jumped into an area that he didn't really educate himself, and he's not prioritizing the victims. He's really just addressing the situation, and he's going to talk about the things related to the situation. So when something comes up of this magnitude, and now everybody's going to go rush and try to address it, they're going to actually expose what they're really concerned about. Again, we don't know what's in his heart. We don't know what's in these people's hearts. But when people speak, like you could see, apply this to me, to this video. What am I most concerned about? What am I talking about the most? Okay. And you'll see, if you watch the video by Dr. Yasir Qadhi, what he's actually most concerned about. Okay. So around the 10-minute mark, he starts off by unfortunately, he actually starts normalizing scandals. And this is another problem in the Ummah. He's actually minimizing and normalizing this actual scandal that happened. I know he talks about in videos like, this is just general speaking and this and that. But when you're speaking right after a very public, like, this is not just something out of the blue and nobody knows what's going on, right? It doesn't matter if you say it's a general top speech and it doesn't apply to the specific situation. It doesn't matter. Your audience is going to associate everything you say in this video with this specific situation. And we have to be careful about that when we're speaking about this. Okay? We have to be very careful about that. So I'll just play the video. He just says, scandals, just regular part of life. Scandals are a regular part of life. I mean, do we need to normalize scandals? Do we need to accept that scandals happen? We need to know that they happen. We need to know, again, that nobody's infallible, that people are going to commit mistakes. They're going to commit small mistakes. They're going to commit major mistakes. But we don't need to normalize this and then get people just like, yeah, just accept it. Be okay with it. No, we don't. Okay? We don't. Especially right after a very public case of sexual misconduct by a very famous leader in the Islamic community. I would like all of you and Dr. Yasir Qadhi, again, to imagine saying this statement to a victim of one of these scandals. Imagine they're looking at you. Just imagine it. Imagine, I'll use the emotional manipulation right now, right? Imagine a child, right? A child, young child, 5, 6, 7 years old, comes to you and says, Imam Fulan, famous Imam Fulan. I watched him on YouTube for years. I listened to him recite. He gave all these lectures and he sexually abused me. And imagine your response to that child, to that child's parents, and to all the other potential children that person might have abused. Is your response going to be, scandals are a reality of life. They happen. I don't think I have to say much more to show you how wrong this is. We don't normalize wrong. As Muslims, we don't normalize it. Yes, we know what's going to happen. We know people commit sins. We don't normalize it. Okay? And Dr. Yasir Qadhi continues down his path by actually criticizing those who want to blame responsible parties. So I'll play the clip. So he said he wants to get some guidelines to move past this simplistic blaming. Okay? So that's, we'll just move on to the next point. And he says, and then he sets the stage for what I believe was really the purpose of his speech. Okay. So he says, we don't want to blame people. We don't want to just blame anybody. And he talks about blaming groups, blaming men, women, or whatever. Okay. But I believe this is the real purpose of his speech or his talk. And I do hope that he does clarify this, or somebody clarifies this in the future. So you ask yourself, why was Dr. Yasir Qadhi at this point in his video criticizing the natural and correct human inclination to try to assign blame when there's abuse, misconduct, and fraud, or whatever you want to call it, happening, when there's a scandal happening? When there's a scandal, or we're talking about spiritual abuse, we're talking about sexual misconduct, we're talking about all these things that's coming up in this recent situation. What's wrong with assigning blame? Because for abuse to happen, there has to be someone that's actually getting abused. There has to be a victim. That means there has to be an offender. There has to be somebody that's doing wrong. That means there's somebody to blame. There's something to blame. And there's usually more than one thing to blame. Yes, the offender deserves most of the blame. Yes, the institution that they work for that didn't have proper controls in place deserves someone to blame. Yes, the other leaders that were made aware of what was going on and didn't do anything and swept it under the rug, they deserve the blame. There's a lot of blame that can go around. And if we're going to just ignore blame and say, yeah, we don't want to blame anybody, right? That's a problem. This is why abuse keeps happening over and over and over again. And nobody knows about it. Or people know about it, nobody does anything about it. Okay? It's a natural and correct human inclination to try and assign blame when wrong occurs. It's actually the Muslim instinct. This is what we're supposed to do. A lot, when we have the rest of our people together and we talk about the situation, we'll get into the Islamic aspect of, we should know this as Muslims. We enjoin the right and forbid the wrong, right? It's because people are concerned, about what's happening, and they want to put a stop to it. Well, what Yasir Qadhi is actually worried about is he talks about blaming the wrong entities. Okay, blaming the wrong entities, and I'll play his own words. Okay, so talks about the wrong entities, and he talks about blaming, people blaming all men. He talks about radical feminism, which is another issue, but I don't want to get into that right now. But why are you bringing up radical feminism? We're talking about sexual misconduct. He starts, blaming different groups, and then he finally gets to what I believe. I could be wrong. Allah knows best, but this is what the video portrays in my analysis. He gets to what I believe. He actually wants to disassociate from the blame. You have to really be careful how people use words and how they speak. We don't want to assign blame to the wrong group. And he gives examples of assigning blame to wrong groups. We don't want to blame all men for something that men do. We say this as Muslims all the time when we're giving dawah, right? We don't want to blame Islam for what some crazy Muslims do, ones that commit terrorism and do crazy stuff. We don't want to blame the perfect religion of Islam for what imperfect Muslims do. We don't want to blame the wrong entities. We don't want to blame all men. We don't want to blame, if you're part of Salafi, or if you're a Sufi, or if you are a Hanafi. We don't want to blame these groups. Or if you're part of Maghribi Institute, or if you're part of the other ones. You don't want to blame. You want to blame the people that are actually involved, right? But then when he actually sets that up, and you have in your mind of people yeah, we don't want to blame all these people. They have nothing to do with it, right? And then he starts talking at length about a certain entity. This is the actual entity that he wants to disassociate from the blame. Okay? And I'm going to just play the video so you can hear it. Okay? This is when he actually gets to it. Bear with me. So he says, institutes are blamed as a whole. He slid that in there. So he's worried about institutes being blamed. What institute are we talking about? There's probably multiple ones that we're talking about. the most notably, and the one that actually Wisam probably got his fame from, right, which is Maghribi Institute, which Dr. Yasir Qadhi is associated with. Let's separate the institute from what this guy did, right? Clearly protecting the institution, okay? And right after this, he transitions to talking about the commercialization of Islam, which at first I actually didn't even understand why he would bring this up. Like, I'm like, what does this have to do with the spiritual abuse that's going on, or the misconduct? What does this have to do with anything? I didn't understand until I actually listened to another brother's video. His name is Nick Pelletier, and I'm sorry if I slaughtered your name, Nick, but Nick Pelletier. He put out a very good video that it really touched my heart. It's called "The Root of Corruption in Islam," in the root of corruption in the Muslim community. I put a link to his page and the video in the description, and I do suggest that all of you watch it. It will resonate with anyone who has experienced spiritual abuse or has tried to fight against it, right? Everything he was saying was, I was like, wow, like, we're like this, he's speaking my language right now. This is the same stuff that we experienced in Return to Fitra and the work that we do. So Dr. Yasir Qadhi, he defends the commercialization of Islam for 10 minutes straight. 10 minutes straight of clearly protecting the institution. But he did say something very important that I want to replay. So let's replay that clip. Perfectly said. Separate these people from what they're actually preaching, right? We love Islam, right? Even we can even say this to Rasulullah. Yes, Rasulullah is perfect in everything he did. So even if we take Islam out of it, which we can't, right? But imagine we just met someone with the qualities and characters of Rasulullah, they would be our best friend. The main reason why we love Rasulullah is because he brought us Islam and showed us how to practice it, showed us how to be good Muslims. And he's infallible because he's a prophet. Everybody else, our love for them is associated with our actual love for Islam, and we can't forget that, right? We love people for the sake of Allah. Islam is perfect. That's very important, all right? But this was during his 10-minute talk about defending, justifying commercialization of Islam. I'm trying to debate whether it's good or bad, the commercialization of Islam, but this is clearly defending the institution that the leaders, because it's these leaders, the famous YouTube personalities, the famous sheikhs, what do you want to call them, the YouTube people that are famous from this commercialization of Islam. So he's defending the institution. Okay. So he finally also comes back to prioritizing the victims by talking about the dangers of opposite genders being alone, which is an important clip I want to play just because we need to know about this. All right. Yes. Very important, right? Shouldn't be alone. Now, I just want to add something to this. Should not be alone in physical space or in virtual space. Okay. Because if you read the Wisam Sharieff report, they were alone in a virtual space, right? We live in a different environment where alone also applies to talking on the phone, being in online rooms, online chats, chat rooms, social media, and all these different things. Alone has a wider context than just being in the same room physically together. Okay. So it's very, very important. And it's good that he mentioned that because we need to know about this. All right. But even as I was going through this, it seems as if every time he made like a step forward in the right direction, he immediately like took a step in the wrong direction. He followed that point with talking about molestation is actually done by family, right? So he followed that point up about, but just to let y'all know, like most of child sexual abuse happens by family and friends and not religious preachers, he says. So in other words, he's saying, and I'm not saying he's saying this, but a person will most likely, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, they're going to interpret this like you should be more concerned about what goes on in your homes and not what goes on in the masjid. You should be more concerned or more worried about what your family and friends are doing and not what the religious leaders are doing. So yes, abuse does happen in homes, right? And it's an important topic to talk about. And the Ummah does need to address it. But you don't try to diminish the role that the Islamic institution or Muslim leaders have played in their own abuse and misconduct by talking about abuse that happens in other places. However, he actually does start talking about the culture in the Ummah and the culture of silence of how sexual topics are just like taboo to talk about. We have this culture of silence in the Ummah. And these are major problems. So even though there was a slight diversion, I'll give him credit for 3 more minutes of actually prioritizing the victims. But then he actually goes right back to, for a lengthy time, he goes back for a lengthy time, for 10, 13 minutes, he focuses on prioritizing the institution. And this is the part of the video where I decided I have to say something. I have to say something so I can help educate whoever is actually willing to listen. So remember, he just talked for a few minutes about this negative culture of silence that we have in the Ummah. And in general, this culture of silence is that we as a Ummah, we think that it's better to keep sins private and not expose the sins of others. That's what we think, right? And I know what you're saying, what some of you are saying or thinking anyway. You're saying, well, but Dr. Yasir Qadhi explains this and he talks about this in the video. Well, go back and listen to it again. Listen to it with the framework that I was talking about and pay attention to what I'm about to tell you guys. Listen to what he emphasizes, because he focuses on one particular point, right? He focuses on one part of exposing sins. He talks briefly about what sins not to expose, really quickly on what sins to expose, and then a lengthy time on what sins, we probably shouldn't expose. I don't really know, right? So in general, in my opinion, he actually focuses on not exposing sins. He starts by talking about not exposing trivial sins. He first says, and I'm not going to play the video because it was lengthy and I'm going to paraphrase, but you can go back and listen to yourself. He says, if you come across a personal private sin that does not affect anyone in the community, that is a sin between this person and Allah. You should privately advise the person and cover the person's private sins, right? We should all know this. Yes. Personal, generic, private sins, they don't affect anybody, right? Or any other person. It's just on them. We should, try to privately advise them. Okay. But there is also a limit to that, but we're not going to go down that road. He then goes to the opposite extreme. Well, he says the opposite is the opposite extreme. He says predatory behavior, grooming behavior, child abuse. There is no question that there's no covering up allowed. You must expose and you must warn. So let me play the video. So this is what he said, right? So then he spends a whole lot of time emphasizing this gray area where he claims that there are these ambiguous sins in this gray area. And he uses a horrible example. He uses secret marriages as an example of an ambiguous issue that we might want to cover up. And this was a major trigger because this was a big mistake by Dr. Yasir Qadhi. And it actually made me raise an eyebrow when he said this, and I'll play the clip. This really made me question what is going on. So first, why bring up secret marriages? How many secret marriages are you aware of? Does this recent issue involve a secret marriage? Because why, right after this giant scandal is coming out, why are you talking about secret marriages? It made me think, like, I wonder if maybe he knows a little something, and maybe the situation with Wisam Sharieff involves some sort of secret marriage, or maybe another incident involving this individual. There's some related to some secret marriages. Allah knows best. But obviously, him talking about this, he's aware of secret marriages, right? And have you covered up secret marriages in the past? I had a lot of questions. First and foremost, I would like Dr. Yasir Qadhi, or anyone that has more knowledge than me, to talk about secret marriages in more detail. Because as far as I understand, a secret marriage is a marriage that is kept from the public, right? And just in general, it's kept from the public. It's kept from the public in multiple ways, but usually involves a marriage where there are actually no witnesses, right? Some guy, some imam, or some whoever, has duped some poor sister into accepting being married without actually following the right methodology, right? But, Dr. Yasir Qadhi did qualify his version of what a secret marriage is. He said it meets all the conditions or something like that, right? Well, what are those conditions? Because as far as I'm aware, 3 out of the 4 schools of jurisprudence require a public announcement of a marriage. But let's go with like what the bare minimum is. Like you have to have 2 witnesses. Okay. And to call it a secret marriage, for whatever reason, these people in this marriage don't want the people in the community to know that they are married. They don't want the people in their community to know they're married. So sometimes what they'll do is, and there's cases of this I could show you guys if we ever get the chance, is like an imam or some famous sheikh or somebody will, dupe some sister that wants to marry him into getting married. Then they go to a community that's far away or online or has his buddy and his some witnesses, either strangers that don't know them or their own friends and family, right? Be these witnesses, and they do a marriage. Then they go back to their community, and meanwhile, he has a secret wife at some apartment somewhere that nobody knows about that he's abusing and doing all types of stuff with, and that's what happens. And for anyone that has, if you do any research into this field of spiritual abuse and sexual misconduct in Islamic institutions, they would actually know, and Dr. Yasir Qadhi should know this, that secret marriages is one of the main grooming tactics used by these Muslim leaders to facilitate their sexual misconduct. It is actually the peak of sexual misconduct in our ummah, right? Because you're actually groom somebody to actually accept being, in a marriage where they're actually fully consenting to the abuse or to the misconduct. And Yasir Qadhi made another big mistake by saying like, oh, they're adults. He says this multiple times, like they're adults, or we're talking about children. Adults can be victims too. Adults can be victims too, especially when we're talking about secret marriages, and especially in America, we're talking about adults for the most part. We're talking about adults. So there are plenty of Muslim women, and I'm pretty sure that those that are listening know of situations where women have been fooled by Muslim leaders into engaging into some secret marriage. Why do they want their marriage to be secret? That's what you have to ask yourself. It's because they don't want the potential victims or other people they want to take advantage of with another secret marriage to know that they are married, right? So like you'll have situations where this, a person is well liked in the community. He gives khutbahs, he teaches classes, and he's like the rage at the masjid. All the single women were like trying to get him because he's just so pious and so good. They're all after him. And he knows this, and he loves the attention. And he uses it to engage in illicit relationships with them on the side, with promises of marriage. Yeah, I'm going to marry you. I know this is wrong, but I just love you so much. Whatever they do to groom these people. And then they engage in sin by, fornicating outside of marriage. But the sister was genuine. She really just wanted to marry this guy because she liked him for whatever reasons. And what does he do instead to keep? And she might make a stand like, okay, no, I'm not doing this anymore. This is a sin. What does he do? He wants to keep having relations with her. Then he takes the next step in his grooming. So instead of that, he says, you know what? Yeah, we can get married, but I don't want people to know right now because I'm not financially set right now. I can't buy you. Whatever he uses to trick this lady into accepting a secret marriage. Then they engage in a secret marriage, and they're continuing that but now it's consensual, allegedly, right? But then he keeps this behavior up with all the other women that want to marry him, and he engages another illicit sexual relationship with another one of these people at the masjid, and they don't know about each other. And then he takes the next step and gets another secret. Then guess what? They find out about each other. Oh, we're married, and then it blows up the spot. This is what really happens. Okay, if you look at sexual misconduct, right, and you look at sexual misconduct as like that's the fire. Fire is burning. Okay, grooming is the smoke that warns you of the fire, right? Grooming warns you. When you see grooming behavior, you're like, oh, there's a fire nearby, right? There's sexual misconduct about to happen or going on. And secret marriages are the smoke and the fire. So I don't have time to get into power dynamics and abuse, but if you come across a secret marriage, this is not something you cover up. It's not something you cover up. And let's go back to what the criteria that Yasir Qadhi established regarding what you should cover and what you should expose. In regards to covering, he said, if it does not affect anyone, then you should cover. Well, the opposite of that is, if it affects someone else, then you should expose it, okay? If it affects somebody else, you should expose it. I know it's not that simple, but these two simple criteria can help you identify what to expose. Let's go back to secret marriages. Do secret marriages affect someone? The answer is yes. They affect the rights of both spouses, and they actually affect the rights of the community, right? Like, let's just like hypothetical, like how the community. Let's just say I'm interested in a sister, and I'm like giving her marriage proposals, sending people like, "Hey, I want to marry you, sister." Like, but she's secretly married to the imam. Now, we're not allowed to approach people that are married for marriage. That's a sin on my part if I knew about it, right? If I knew about it. And she's not allowed to enter. But how does she keep the secret? What does she say? Oh, I'm just not interested in you. Or I'm just going to keep pursuing her. Or someone else is going to keep pursuing her. Or what if the community sees the imam in private situation with his secret wife? Then it becomes a big scandal. So we can go down this road and talk about secret marriage, but the problem is that this is something that definitely affects multiple people, right? And is a secret marriage good? Is it good? Well, let's play what or I don't have the clip ready, but Dr. Yasir Qadhi talked about it's immoral. It's definitely something bad. It's something frowned upon. You can go to the video and play what he said about secret marriages. It's not something good. So it's something that's affecting somebody. It's something that's bad. It's something that we should expose. Okay, so I'm not going to go down the road of why they're so bad, but you got to get the idea. But the simple criteria, as outlined by Dr. Yasir Qadhi, right, is that if it affects somebody else, if the abuse or misconduct or the behavior is affecting somebody else, then you need to expose those. Okay, you need to expose the activity. So I have no doubt, and this is really why the red flags went up. I have no doubt that something related to this recent situation, or maybe not, will be exposed about this relates to secret marriage. And I hope it doesn't. I pray to Allah that it doesn't. Okay, I hope I'm wrong on this. But getting back to Yasir Qadhi, he spends the last 10 minutes talking about how it is okay to listen to other people that others might not like or agree with. It's okay to listen to people that have made mistakes in the past, but they repented. And he also talks about, the various like internal controls that they have at Epic Masjid, right? He talks about like the cameras. There's cameras in every room. We don't review them, but there's cameras everywhere. Like, at least it's a deterrent a little bit, but they don't review them. Anyway, we could have another video talking about internal controls, but they have cameras. He said they don't allow, counseling and all these different things. But in general, the whole point is that he spent the last 10 minutes of this 40-minute speech defending the institution, defending the leaders that made mistakes, defending the leaders that not everybody agrees with or has issues with, defending his own masjid, saying, oh, we have these controls in place. So let's look, okay, remember the question that we asked, okay? Remember the question that we asked. So did Dr. Yasir Qadhi prioritize victims or prioritize institution? So let's tally this up to see if Dr. Yasir Qadhi did a good job focusing on protecting victims, or if he made the mistake that most leaders do by focusing on protecting the institution and the leaders. So it's very clear that so we talk about the first 3 minutes of the video. He talks about how we're not infallible. Us leaders, any leader, anybody, we're not infallible. Only prophets are infallible. So that's good, right? He talked about prioritizing, the victims. What about next 3 minutes? He talks about, don't seek knowledge for fame. Even though it's a very good point, he's actually prioritizing the institution, prioritizing leaders. So 50-50 at this point. Then he goes back to talking about spiritual abuse. Very good. Defining spiritual abuse, right? He's prioritizing victims. Then he spends a whole whopping 10 minutes talking about, in that 10 minutes, he normalized scandals. He defended celebrity Islam. And he said, don't blame the institutes. So he prioritized, leadership. He prioritized the institution. Then he comes back a little bit and he says, he starts talking about the culture of silence and how bad that is in the Ummah. All right, you can gain a little ground on prioritizing the victims. Then another 10 minutes talking about covering sins and covering, we need to talk about secret marriages. You need to decide. No, you as leaders need to talk about this, right? And decide whether you're exposing secret marriages. But you need to expose it. And that's the decision you guys need to come to. You need to expose. I'm pretty sure there's some random individual situations that you might, oh, maybe this one we'd leave alone. But for the most part, if you're a leader and you know of other leaders in the Ummah that have secret marriages, you need to expose these. You need to expose these. Okay? Because you'll uncover, like you lift a rock and see a bunch of bugs running after you expose that secret marriage. But you can see now very clearly prioritizing the institution. And then the last 10 minutes, he still prioritizes the institution by talking about how people make mistakes and it's okay to listen to them, and we have some good controls at Epic Masjid. So if you look at this, out of the 40 minutes, he spent 7 minutes prioritizing the victims. So it's very clear that Dr. Yasir Qadhi was protecting the institution in the speech and the other leaders that he's associated with, which is his institution, rather than focusing on the potential and actual victims. And this is not just an issue with Yasir Qadhi. I want to highlight that. It's not just an issue with him. It's an issue with all of us leaders in the Ummah. It's a major issue that we have to deal with and we have to address. Email r2f@gmail.com. We want to work with you. We want to talk with you. Contact us so we can all work together to help protect those who are vulnerable in our communities. This video got kind of long, so I'm going to try to end it here and wrap it up here. I pray we all get better as a Ummah. I remain on this path. We remain on this path of trying to help out the Ummah in this situation. We are willing to work with anybody that has the same goals. Whether you want to interview us, we'll interview you, talk about our experiences, because we were actually in a cult, right? So we've seen, and we are very keen on these types of behaviors, and we recognize all these red flags. Like I said, you probably watched that video of Yasir Qadhi and nothing was wrong with it. But because we can recognize the mistakes and how these things actually affect people and how these things are interpreted by the actual victims and potential victims, we see the issues in it. Okay. And again, we were, myself and all of us included at our return to Fitra, we are open to criticism. Message us if I made mistakes or you want some input. Let's talk about it. Let's get better. Let's all get better together. And I'll end with that. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.